Well,
They would train him and then he could get his treatment back down. And then that kind of,
yeah.
involved with the Sioux City and he just
Well, no. So that's a lot of water. So yeah, that's a treated water plant. So between 54 and about 65.
About right, we
Yeah,
got inflation, you know, ours.
right. Yeah, no. I'm sorry.
That was actually
Too many
that was actually scaring me.
Too many people talking in my head at the same
So
time.
that's wells and the pipeline.
Yeah,
Right.
that's, yeah, and they're actually repiping a new loop all the way across to their south. So that's
Just, I kind of forgot, I thought there was well stuff.
yeah, and there's the North Wells and Wellfield. Yeah, right. No, certainly the difference is roughly 30 in distributions.
Phone, tablet.
All right, in the essence of staying on time, I would imagine tonight's going to be a lively discussion, and it looks like a lot of slides. So we'll get started. Al, roll call.
Benson.
Here.
Brunig. Here. Maibaum.
Here.
Minor.
Here.
Schramm.
Here.
Weber.
Here.
Villanueva.
Here.
Mayor Moser.
Here.
City Manager Leon.
Here.
City Attorney Denherter. Here. Commissioner Johnson.
All right. Now is the time and the place for somebody who wants to appear in front of the commission on something not on the work session agenda tonight. And for those of you not aware, the work session tonight deals with sewer rates, wastewater treatment plant, and the ARPA projects. All right. Seeing no movement, then I will turn it over to City Manager Leon to get us started.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the Commission, and public. As you know, we're about to embark on several different improvement projects with our wastewater facility. We have talked to you about the major decision of staying in our current location as we completely overhaul that facility. And as we're beginning our planning, we have been awarded significant funding, which Kyle will touch on in this presentation, to help out with that project. And we also have to borrow some money. So we received some grants from the ARPA grant, and also we'll be using some of our ARP, American Rescue Plan, thank you, Kyle, funds. But we also need to borrow significant dollars from the state revolving loan fund. So before we can actually do that, we have to set rates, and the rates have to actually exceed the cost of the improvements. I think it's 110%. So what we've done tonight is put together a presentation to kind of remind you of the project and what it entails, and then we've provided something for you to react to in terms of a rate structure. We thought that would be easier as opposed to just say, here's how much it costs, what do you want to do? So Al and Kyle have been working closely together with a rate structure for you to respond and react to. What we'd like to do is get your feedback on that. and then be able to bring that forward to you to act on at a different meeting. So we wouldn't ask you to act at your regular meeting tonight. We would like to also for you to have time to have community input and to consider this. But we do need to compress the timeline. For those of you who are on the commission, a few years ago, we had a couple of years to walk through rates and explain rates and educate about rates. We'll do our best to do that education, but we won't be afforded that time because the funds actually have to be expended by 2026. So we have to get moving here relatively quickly, but we will do our best to be communicative and transparent about the rate increase that we'll be proposing. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kyle. He's worked hard on the presentation and has got some other reminders about wastewater in there as well. He's going to try to hit everything at once. So welcome, Kyle.
Good evening. Again, Honorable Mayor, Commission, public, thank you for your time tonight. Like Amy stated, a big portion of this is about the wastewater. We do touch on the water improvements, but not as much in this presentation. It's more about the wastewater side. So as we move forward within the introductions here, like Amy mentioned, there's been a pretty large team that's actually worked on putting this presentation together. Myself, Al Varick on the rate side of it, and of course Tanner Hansen, the wastewater plant superintendent, Donnie Robinson on the water distribution and wastewater collection side of those projects, and then Mr. Peters with HDR really helped get that facilities plan together in short notice to meet those funding deadlines. So we'll talk a lot about that compressed timeline and how that works and how the funding works. So again, why invest now? Really the first step we've got to understand is kind of what we do really. And so when you go to the next slide here, people kind of probably don't realize, we collect and treat about 1.7 million gallons a day of wastewater. On a year, we average about 620 million gallons per year of wastewater that we treat. When we talk about that treatment, we remove about 95% of the BOD, the biochemical or biological oxygen demand. And that's kind of a gauge or a measure of the amount of organic pollution in the water. We remove about 96% of the suspended solids. That's the solids after the heavy ones have already been removed. So that's really those suspended solids that are hanging in the water. So, when we're done with this process, the water is really fairly clean and safe for our environment. And we also do some disinfection of that product before it goes back to the river, and then pathogen reduction when we look at our solids and things. So, why do it? It's really a quality of life issue. First and foremost, it's convenience. You get to flush your toilet, turn on your faucet and let it go down the drain and it actually disappears. So the convenience is a big side. Public health, we'll talk a little bit more, but really it's really critical for public health and of course protecting our environment and protecting our river. When we talk about investing in our infrastructure, of course we always have kind of those same ones that come up every time, aging infrastructure. A lot of the equipment at the facility that was overhauled in that 2000 timeframe with the last upgrades, a lot of that equipment has met its lifespan at 20 years. And we also have a lot of equipment, underground piping, things that weren't replaced in that last phase. So we've got some things, they're in that 30 to 57 years old. We'll talk more about the available funding. We haven't seen funding like this since the 70s as part of the Clean Water Act. We always look at future regulations. We'll have a little bit of discussion about that too, but we're always looking and planning for those future regulations, and we're always looking and planning for growth. So we do have a couple steps in our treatment where we do need to add some capacity, and that'll be some of the brick and mortar construction, but there's not a lot of brick and mortar construction. It's really a lot of equipment replacement. When you look at the aging conditions, again, it was construction in 1964. We had several plant upgrades through the years, the 70s, the 80s, early 2000s. Again, portions are 30 to 57 years old that weren't replaced that last time. Our grit removal facilities lack some capacity, so we will be looking at a little bit of brick and mortar construction there. There's no means to take our secondary clarifiers offline. If you remember, that's the picture of doing the repairs in the kayak. So we'll make some improvements there. And again, the major process equipment, most of that gets replaced, things like HVAC. Again, wastewater is a really tough environment for that equipment to hold up. So We look at a lot of replacement there. One of the ones we're running into is our boilers. Their current location doesn't meet the new fire codes. So we'll need to relocate those to a separate structure. So one of the things we're really looking at now is when you look at current lead times, that really increases our risk when it comes to failures. And that's both monetary. When you have something fail, a couple of years ago, you overnighted a part in. Today, you have a failure, some of those parts, we're looking at some of the equipment for our current project are 40 weeks out. So that changes our philosophy on how we operate the facility in terms of parts being that and the risk you run, both in, like I said, monetary and in the meeting our standards and our regulations and permits. So again, as we went through the facility plan, we always look at that increase in population and making sure we're designing to service that population into the future. There's not a large capacity issue here yet, but we are taking that into account with the improvements. And then, of course, the biggest one that's really changing things right now is the funding. So this is really what drove our timeline. When you look at that, 23 million for loan, 16.7 million in grant. We also received another grant for 2 million in consolidated. And then again, like I said, you look at those interest rates on the water collection distribution on those loans. One thing I will point out is when we get into it, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but all the grant is being placed in the wastewater project just for ease of distribution of the grant. Those funds are still contingent upon the other two projects, the distribution and collection project happening. So we'll talk about that more as we get into future slides. Getting a little bit about the project, I won't get too deep into these as we've talked a little bit more about the projects in the past, but again, it's really not a lot of brick and mortar. The red construction is really the only brick and mortar. I do have a list of projects there we'll be doing. Again, the last one, there's redundancy and resiliency. Wastewater, there's really no way to shut it off. It's always flowing. So it's important to have that redundancy in everything you do. So there's two of everything we have at the facility. One thing I did want to point out on this slide is if you look at the area in green, that would be a future improvement for nutrient removal. Nutrient removal is the next regulation coming down in wastewater. The state's thinking it's still around 10 years out, so they're not offering funding for nutrient removal at this time. But I didn't want to get in and get this project done and come back in 10 years and say we have to do another one and people don't understand why. So that's still out there on the horizon. Things may change. That's why the state's saying let's hold off for now. But most likely we'll have nutrient removal as requirements, in that 10-year outlook. So next one, we get into a little bit of the wastewater collection system. The big thing I want to point out here is when you look at this map, the bright green is plastic pipe. The orange is the clay tile pipe. As you can see, there's very little green within the yellow. The little bit of green that is in there is really a transmission line that was put in, I can remember, probably 15 years ago. But the point of that is we've done very little replacement of clay tile pipe in our collection system. It's clay tile type pipe is a great product, but when you look at the time that it's been in the ground, some of that pipe is probably 100 years old. One of the things that's going to come out of our collection master plan is that pipe is going to have to start being replaced. And again, it's going to cost money. In this project, we do have a few replacements of some clay tile, a few projects that we selected. We also have a few extensions in this project, like the 8th Street Burley to Furtick is a replacement of a current one. We also have the Hastings lift station in there for replacement. We have the Highway 50 crossing there at Martin Creek that we've had several issues. We've had to line it. With the flow of the creek during the flood, it kind of undercut the supports that are holding it up. If you go to the next slide, again, we have a couple expansions like the East Yankton Thrive property. We put that project in there as a potential project. So that's about 7.2 million in collection. The next one is water. Again, as you can see, the green is plastic. I guess you'd call it, I'm not sure if that's pink or purple, is is a cast iron pipe. We've done quite a bit of water main replacement. That's kind of been part of our capital improvement planning for many years now, but there's still a lot of cast iron pipe in the ground that we're in the process of replacing. So through that, we got about 22 water main projects that were listed in our facility plan. Again, that's mostly replacing that cast iron pipe with plastic. We do have a water meter upgrade. A large percent of our meters are over 15 years old that are out in the system. So we've actually started the budget replacement of some of those meters. This basically speeds up that process of do them all at once, and also switch over to a fixed-based system where we install several towers in town. And rather than have staff go out and read the meters with the handheld or with the computer, finance will be able to read them right from their desk. So that's an improvement. And then the elevated tower rehabilitation. When you look at our elevated water towers, the coatings are essential. That's what protects the metal from the water, so you don't get oxidation and rusting. We've had some issues with our towers, the coatings. We just finished up an inspection. We haven't got the report back. That's why there's such a wide range in that number, that 350 to 900. Depends on how much recoating we have to do. We're hoping it's only going to be on the inside, but we'll see what the report comes back with. So with the water, we were looking at about 8.2 million. The ARPA timeline, this is the one that kind of puts us where we're at today. We were notified of the funds on September 1st. We basically were notified that they were going to utilize the existing environmental funding application process that was out there. So what that meant is first thing we had to do was we had to get these projects listed on the state water plan. State water plan was due October 1st. So we had about a month to get all this put together on the state water plan. It doesn't require, at that point, it doesn't require full engineering studies, but it does require some engineering and prices to go with it. So that's where HDR came in and helped us meet that deadline. Then the applications themselves were due January 1st. So that gave us about 3 months to put, the official plans together and everything, the final facility plan and everything, the state. And then we were awarded the funds in April 13 of this year. So again, that was a really tight timeline to get this stuff put together, get it in. Again, that's just the timeline that we were given. A little bit more about the funding. American Rescue Plan Act. When you look at the ARPA funds, there was about $600 million that the state DA&R received for water and sewer infrastructure projects across the state. One of the first things that came out is they would match our local funds. We received about 2.5 million of our own local ARPA funds. If we put that towards water and wastewater projects, they will match that fund. So we can turn 2.5 into 5 million. I have not seen that kind of deal on any other of the programs out there right now. So that's a pretty large benefit. The next phase we came out with approximately 30% grant. That was based on population. Size of Yankton, we were awarded 30% grant. And then it was capped at about $3,000 per person. So figure 15,000 population, that caps our total project cost at about 45 million. Putting our 2.5 match, that gets us up to about $50 million worth of projects that they would match. Again, this is all contingent upon the amount of loan we take having 110% coverage. Just a little bit about the funding. The state revolving fund, and I should also add the consolidated grant funds into this one, are federal and state funds managed by the state. They still have some of the procurement requirements, American Iron and Steel, but there's quite a bit of flexibility with what how we use this money. Like I said, there's 22 water main projects. If we mix them up and move them around, maybe take one out and add one that wasn't originally there, it's a water main project. The state will work with us. So there is some flexibility in helping control costs. The American Rescue Plan Act, again, it's still managed by the state, but it's federal funds, and they do have some additional requirements. And the big one that's there is that 2026 deadline. So that 30% of the funds have to be spent by 2026. That's really where we start to come in with that quick timeline to get the projects out, get the funding, and then having to turn around and have the the funds spent by 2026, that's really where we compress that timeline. And it's not a great deal to have to do, but again, that's kind of the deck of cards we were dealt with this. And then I threw in the EDA funds, the Economic Development Administration. That's the current project we have going on right now. And you have to remember with that one, there's very little flexibility. The projects were in the original engineering plan have to be completed. We won't have that with the SRF funds. If we start going way over budget, we have to pull some projects to stay on budget that will be allowed through SRF. So there's a little bit more control and management of funds with the SRF. So again, as we talk about those capitalizing on those funds, the first thing I point out is when I look at that 2% interest rates, when I think Toby was here for the last work session when he talked about 5 or 6 more adjustments to interest rates that the feds are going to make. I'm assuming all those adjustments in interest rates are going to be up, not down. So 2% interest this time we're probably not going to see that again for a while. The ARPA funds themselves, again, American Rescue Plan funds, these are one-time funds. Like I said, we haven't seen funding in terms of grants like this since the 70s. And again, the funds are being gobbled up pretty quickly. So if we're not on them now, we're probably not going to get them a year from now, 2 years from now. Consolidated facilities, that grant is really more controlled by our rates. So hitting some thresholds with our rates is what gets us that $2 million grant. Again, wastewater and water distribution, again, low interest loans. The 20-year loans are set by those projects are more equipment related, so it's a shorter loan. When you look at water distribution and water mains, their lifespan's much longer, so they allow you to do a 30-year loan. The biggest thing I would note here is the 18 million for grant is not changing. If the project gets larger, it's all going to go on the loan. This is the cap. This is maximizing the most we could get in grants. If that total project cost goes down and the loan value goes down, the grant's going to follow it, again, because it's that 30% match. So the numbers we kind of hit here were maximizing the amount of grant we could get. Going to the next slide. We kind of look at the timeline of how we got here too. And the reason I have this on there is these projects they're not bridge to nowhere projects. These are projects, water main projects that were on our capital improvement plan. These were sewer lines, sewer project extensions that were in our capital improvement plan. We came out of the 2019 flood and originally started our condition assessment at the wastewater plant. 2019, 2020, we started planning for that EDA project and potential funds. 2020, we budgeted for some capital improvements for the master plan for not only the facility but also the collection system. In 2021, we actually were working on the master plan for the facility, knowing that we were going to be needing to make improvements at some point in the near future. As the ARPA funds came out, HDR just kind of morphed that into creating our facility plan. The facility plan is the document you need for the funding package. Where we're at today, we're collecting flow data out in our collection system as part of that collection system master plan. The EDA project is bid out and approved and should begin construction here, go to work here fairly soon. And then we also have surveying and mapping Inc. Should be mobilizing the town here probably within the next week or two. And they're going to start doing all the surveying and collecting all the GPS data for every manhole in town, every water valve, and those things. So again, these projects weren't projects that are projects, bridges nowhere. These are projects that we're already beginning to work on. And like I said, today we're in that April funding award, the work session today. Our time really is, again, based on what you guys feel is the right, would be to look at it again, a June rate adjustment resolution. Again, the resolution needs to be in place to secure the funding. And again, the total project cost, if that comes down, the grant goes down with it. So the rates actually wouldn't go into effect till November. But again, we would get that resolution put together in June. I believe it takes a first and second reading, and then that would secure our funds, and we could be going into that next phase of selecting an engineer, approving and getting design going. it's pretty hard to compress the design. The design's going to take, you know, well into the spring of 2023, most likely in the summer of 2023. We would look at bidding the project out in the summer of 2023, not having much construction really in 2023 as we moved into winter, and really having the major construction in 2024 and 2025 again, and then final completion in 2026. Again, it's so with where we got that EDA money and how that is with that in that 2026 deadline, that's really what compresses our timeline. Again, it's not ideal, but we'll do the best we can to be as transparent about it as possible. And then the bad slide. How will this affect our rates? Currently, our rates at the wastewater plant are about $45.22. This is based on 5,000 gallons. That's kind of the industry standard of what they kind of consider an average user. Of course, family with 12 kids is going to be higher. Single person is going to be less. But that's just kind of the standard they use. Water rate's about $59 for 5,000 gallons. So the impact on rates would be about $6.31 for 4 years. So you're looking at new rate of $51.53 the first year. Second year, $57.84. Third year, $64.15. And that fourth year, $70.46. So you get a total rate adjustment over that 4-year period of $25.24, which is pretty substantial. But if you look at what that $18 million in grant saves us, that saves us approximately about $18.88 in surcharge. So not doing the project today is really going to push the project off, and you're not going to have the grants in the future, and you're most likely not going to have the lower interest rates. So we're looking at a new wastewater rate of about $70.46, $59 on the water. One thing I would add to this is the surcharge that's in place to cover the loan, or the loan portion. It doesn't take into account any operational costs. We feel, I was kind of speaking for Al too, I say this, we feel okay about our rates on the usage sides, but I wouldn't say we feel good about them. So we'll continue to monitor the inflation as prices continue to grow and things like chemicals. We're gonna have to pay our employees more, energy costs and things like that. We will have to evaluate our usage side of the rates in terms of operational expenses here in November. So again, I hope we don't have any major rate increases then, but I can't say that we won't at this time. Just, it's a tough market right now. So that's kind of where we're at with rates. What do you get for $70.46? Again, we just kind of put some numbers together. Again, this is based on approximately 5,000 gallons of water. Be roughly the same as pouring 40,000 bottles a month of 16-ounce bottles of water down the drain. Be about equivalent to doing 290 showers, 3,125 toilet flushes, 200 loads of laundry, 1,000 dishwashing cycles. And the biggest part of this is really, it's the convenience. You get to do all this just by flushing your toilet or letting it run down the drain. So it's collected, treated, and returned to the Missouri River. Why is that important? Again, it's really about, the first and really what drove wastewater treatment in the beginning was public health, preventing fecal and waterborne illnesses, diarrhea, cholera, typhoid. There's a whole list of them. When you look back, wastewater treatment really increased the human life expectancy. So the other side was protecting the environment. When you look at the Missouri River, it's a domestic water supply for millions of people. From here in our state, from Mobridge to Chamberlain to Pierre, they're all pulling water out of the river, down to cities as large as St. Louis. So there's literally millions of people that rely on the Missouri River for domestic water supply. Here in Yankton, it's immersion recreational water. It's classified as that. So it's the swimming and boating, which is critical to our economy here in Yankton. Fish and wildlife propagation, again, critical to our state, critical for me. Irrigation, commercial, industrial uses, we kind of forget about those, but those are also used up and down the river. So the water is really a critical resource when you look at it. And honestly, the reason we do it is they're mandated. We have to meet these regulations. So, you know, we have a discharge monitoring requirements, regulations, and limits that we have to meet. And to be honest, we've kind of treated wastewater so well for so long, we've kind of forgotten what happens if you don't. So, next slide, and the final slide, we had to put a little bit of, trying to lighten the mood a little bit. What do you get for $6.31? I don't think you can get a Happy Meal for that anymore. You get a 6-pack of beer, but it's going to be cheap beer. You can't get 2 gallons of water anymore, or 2 gallons of water, 2 gallons of gas, not for that $6.31. 12-pack of pop, maybe. And a bag of Amy's dog treats for Rufus. Rufus is our newest wastewater treatment plant attendee, I guess I would say. He's not technically an employee yet, but our lab supervisor got a new puppy that spent a couple weeks at the plant, so everybody got to come down and see Rufus. So, but that's kind of where we're at with it. Again, I know the timeline's compressed, which isn't ideal, but there's a lot of funding there and availability of funds right now that I think we need to take advantage of. So open up for questions, concerns.
So one thing I want to make sure the commission understands, and maybe this is for Al to explain, is how we came up with that rate and what your thought process was there.
Well, Kyle came up with what we need. Now I come up with the bad news of what it's going to cost us. And again, one thing I've not been able to do in my reign as finance officer is come up with a new money tree without coming up with rates or something to pay for that money tree. So again, getting back to where we came up with these rates, part of it is what's required in order to borrow. You know, we have to have 110% debt coverage. Part of it is trying to figure out the easiest way to pass this on to the users without making it an extremely hardship or burden. So that's part of the idea of going behind the 4 years. And I'll just start addressing my spreadsheet. If you start on the top left and go down that column A and B, just the 3 loans that we're talking about, the first one is one that we've already been approved for. We just haven't started borrowing on it or drawing down on this yet. The reason I rolled that in is because Kyle, in the process of getting these 2 big grants, allowed us a little bit more flexibility. And so I decided that the easiest way to do this is to roll that loan into this surcharge also. And then, of course, the next 2 are the 2 proposed surcharge, or 2 proposed projects that we're talking about right now, and that's the 23 million and the 7.2 million. So it's just math. You know, the annual amortization on the first one is 262,000. When you add the 10% in, it becomes 289,000. On one of the new loans, the $23 million, the annual amortization is 1.4 million. You add the 10% in, it's 1.559 million. And again, the third one is the more of the collection system, the 7,200,000. The annual amortization on that is 437,000. You add the 10% in, it's 481,000. So all 3 of those loans together, what we have to come up with in debt service is $2,329,000 a year. I took a very cautious approach to this. So it's planned out through 4 years. It's planned with absolutely no growth. So any growth we have actually helps us, and it'll be assessed at the end of 4 years, just like we will be talking about with water when we go through the budget process this summer now. So at 2021, we had yearly customer in the wastewater part is of 5,327 customers. To raise 2,300,000 came up with a proposed surcharge of $36.46, and that raises 2.33, so it's slightly over the debt requirement. the surcharge that we planned, or the steps that we planned on talking about is much like we did with water. We'll pass this on over 4 years. So again, if you adopt my proposals and choose to go forward with this, it would amount to about $6.31 a year, each year for 4 years. With the current consumption right now at $45.22, if we don't raise consumption at all, and just the surcharge only, the new rate would be $51.53. That first year, that's a 13.95% increase to the average user. It really does look like we'll be able to get by without a rate increase on the consumption side, but it's also an extremely cautious approach again because of what we're experiencing on inflation, what we're experiencing on some of our bids. So it's something that I won't guarantee that we won't be looking at consumption rate increases come fall. We will review it again, but at the current time, I feel comfortable that we won't be required to have a consumption increase too. It will strictly be the surcharge. A short little explanation before I finish the spreadsheet I have is the surcharge, it's not the resolution that requires 2 readings. It's, first of all, we have to adopt an ordinance that sets up the surcharge to pay SRF loans. Again, it's much like we did with water. So that ordinance requires 2 readings, a first reading and a second reading. The proposal will be the first meeting in June is the first reading of the ordinance. The second meeting in June is the second reading, public hearing and action. And if approved, we'll also have a rate resolution that sets the 4 years of rates, the surcharge rate, a little fly bugging me here, sets the 4 years on that same night. So it will still be one night. It won't be effective again until November 1st. We've taken that approach in the past too. Typically, again, it's a way to soften the effect of that increase because when you adopt it in November, everybody has started using less water and sending it down the drain less too because the winter is starting to approach. So even though we tell them there's going to be an increase by adopting it like we have in the past, we've had numerous people talk about, well, I don't understand. I thought we had a rate increase. My bill went down. It's to soften it. Eventually, they have to pay more. None of that magic of the timing lessens the fact that we will pay more. But hopefully by doing it in November again, you soften the impact to the average consumer. I'll go back to the rest of my spreadsheet here. And this is just to try and give you a little bit of understanding of why I think that we won't take a consumption increase yet. If you look at the consumer or the current consumption rate of $6.80 per gallon, in 2021, we finished up with using 508,794,000, that is in thousands, by the way, without taking into account the base, and I'll get back to that a little bit too, but if we have the same exact consumption, we would raise, without raising the rate, we would raise revenue of $3,459,000. That's not including the base. The base now will be the surcharge. And I should have started that with when we talked about the increase in surcharge. We're using the current base as the beginning of our surcharge and adding to that. So while we talk about $631 a year, the first year, the total is $17 and something. The next year, it's $25 and something. The next year, $32 again. So we're not eliminating that part of the consumption, but you used that, or that price was, or that rate was in effect no matter what you used, because that was our base. Now it's just part of the surcharge. Excuse me. So again, getting back to the bottom of my spreadsheet here, the 3,459,000 that raises, part of that is depreciation, and typically, you know, again, you don't pay out depreciation, but you try and use depreciation to pay for principals and capital. So included in that 3,459 is this depreciation, our annual depreciation of $1 million. To the right of that is currently we have a loan number 3, a loan number 4, and then again, the proposals are loans 5, 6, and 7. Loan 3 is an older loan that it basically was the last time we redid everything at the plant. That's paid in full next year anyway. So that comes off the books. Number 4 is a smaller loan, and the only reason I didn't roll that in right now is, again, with the growth, or with any growth, hopefully we'll be able to absorb that into the surcharge too. And all that would mean is adopting a amendment to the ordinance when it becomes at the end of 4 years. If we don't have enough, it's, excuse me, small enough debt service that we'll be able to absorb that into the consumption rate also without being a huge burden on the average user. Not used to talking this much. I'm used to letting Kyle do it all. So again, the operating expenses, the 2021 the operating expenses in 2021 were $3,200,000. Without raising the consumption rate, we would be approximately $200,000 above what we need. That's a 7.88% increase. In addition, the year-to-date April figures, our expenses are technically down, not much, but down a little less than 1%, and our revenues are up almost 3.8%. So again, that's that much more cushion that we have, and why I don't think we're going to need a consumption rate increase also. I believe we'll be able to do it without raising rates, but we're also in just a extremely volatile period with inflation and some of the other stuff going on. So I reserve the right to come back later in the year after our budget process and say, I'm sorry, couldn't quite do it. So questions? I kind of threw a lot of numbers at you here.
I think everybody got lost in the numbers, keeping it all straight.
And again, that's another reason why we talked about having the work session tonight and not having this on the agenda further. It gives you a couple weeks to absorb some of this. And even at the next meeting, we won't be adopting anything yet. We will merely be having the first rate on the surcharge ordinance. So technically, you have a whole month to digest some of this. Through it all, I have no magic answers. We need to have more revenue in order to pay for all this.
I would ask probably more of my fellow city commissioners. One of the things we were asked, Amy and I were asked as we meet with the media every Friday, is your thoughts on the gradual increase. Gradual increase, so looking at ramping up versus what it may look like if we just tacked it all on from the beginning and started to go. 2, before you answer that, and I kind of want to get your feedback on that, is Al or Kyle, I know one of the other questions we always get is there any way we can do this with city funding and not put this on the users?
I'll take a stab at that,
You
absolutely.
can, and then I can have Kyle give his answer from Friday too.
Absolutely we can. But that would mean cutting something else. You know, we don't have this kind of excess funds annually. I'll give you an example of, an easy one would be our second penny for capital. We could pay this out of the second penny for capital. But if you look at our plan for funding projects, a lot of that would have to get pushed. So you'd start to see streets in disarray again. I think all of you will agree that we've had fairly good success with our projects and a lot of compliments from our community and people that visit our community about our infrastructure on our streets and stuff. And literally, that's about the only place it could come from. I mean, we couldn't, if we put it into using property tax and/or sales tax, then we're cutting out another service. So law enforcement, their budget's over $3 million a year. We could drop law enforcement and pay for this. I hesitate to think about what our community would be like without law enforcement. I know that everybody in this room would be fine because we're not out stealing and speeding and drinking and stuff like that at night. But there's a lot in our community that we still have to worry about. We do need law enforcement. Library is, I want to say our budget is about 700,000. That'd go a long ways. But then we would be closing the library. So again, there's just not a way to pay for this without either cutting drastically on some services somewhere or coming up with a rate increase. And this is like what we experienced with water when we adopted the surcharge there. I think that the city has been very progressive about trying to keep up on infrastructure. And I think that's a goal that we should always adopt and continue to support, but it does take more in rates.
I would also add, as an industry, water and wastewater projects are normally funded through rates. That's virtually what every community's doing. It's not uncommon. That's the norm.
You know, Al mentioned this, the only way to actually offset this cost would be to increase the number of users. And we can't do that by cutting other programs. You know, people are going to look at they want to move here, they're going to look at our streets, they're going to look at our police protection, our fire, they're going to look at all of those services, and if we have inadequate services, we're not going to attract people to move here to fill the job. So you can't do one without the other, you have to do both.
Other thoughts from the commission on the step increase versus any other alternative of just raising a flat rate to start from the beginning?
I think it's important to do the step increase. That's what we did with the water treatment plant. And nobody likes the rate increase, but by doing the step, it lessens the blow slightly, right? And I think that's important, especially as we're seeing prices rise everywhere.
Yeah, the volatility right now, I mean, we can't predict what that volatility is going to be a year from now. Maybe inflation is reduced some. You know, that's, by putting it all up front, we really hurt the fact that inflation is so high right now across the board. So I think the steps make complete sense.
I think the annual steps also offer us an opportunity to remind the public why this is happening and get their buy-in as to, you know, we got grant money that goes towards this, and this is what we're getting for it. So I think that's an important component of the steps every year as well.
And for what it's worth, I'd reiterate what Kyle brought up on one of his slides. While we're in this compressed timeline and it seems like it's getting rushed, it is based on how we did the water. But through it all, by doing this, we're saving an additional $18. That'd be over 2 more years, almost 2.5 years of what our step increases are right now. So it was just, the timing is good for us. There's a lot of communities in South Dakota that weren't prepared enough to be able to do it in the crunch timeline. By the fact that we were already working on this diligently, we've benefited to the tune of about $18.88 in surcharge because of the grants that we're receiving, so.
Al, how long do you think, so we had the water increase and now we're having the wastewater increase. I know our equipment and that is on about a 20-year at wastewater, right? How long do you think we have before, looking into the future, before we will have another potential large-scale price increase? I mean,
In wastewater, I think it depends a lot on what we start experiencing with our clay tile. This is going to take care of a lot of the immediate concerns that we have on infrastructure other than the distribution system. So depending on, I don't see that failing all at once, but ideally, we need to start worrying about starting to replace that too. That could affect these surcharge rates, because again, it'll take borrowing. We're not gaining extra. This isn't a for-profit corporation. We're not gaining extra to save here. We're trying to just keep up. So we won't have money set aside for the clay tile, and just like we didn't have money set aside for all these improvements. If we had adopted rates this high 20 years ago, we wouldn't be borrowing now. But I don't think the average citizen understands quite what it takes, and they just don't like government to have money sitting around. They want you to use the money, not have it sitting in a fund planning for this future stuff.
That brings up a good point. I guess I had wrote a question mark next to that in my slide when he brought up the clay tile pipe again. What is the shelf life on that? I mean, you're saying some of that's 100 years old. Is this a 5, 10, 15, 50, Stephanie Mosier's not around, don't worry about it for me tonight? Or what typically is the shelf life on that?
That's a hard question to answer, because it's not like the cast iron pipe where it starts to fail after a certain number of years. What it's really going to come down is when we do that condition assessment and we go in and we televise that sewer. We're going to try to televise as much as we can through this wastewater collection system master plan. Then we'll have a little bit of better idea. What you tend to see is the pipe starts to get a lot of cracks in it, and you start to get, and we're seeing a lot of this, so this leads into a really good discussion. We're seeing with the dry weather, clay tile and sewer is gravity. It's gravity flows. It's not pressurized, so there's no pressure on it. So if clay tile breaks, you don't know it, basically until you get a sinkhole a lot of times. But every single crack, those tree roots grow in there, especially in this dry weather the last couple of years. Tree roots have really migrated to our sewer line. So it really comes down to condition. It doesn't really degrade as much as, say, like the cast iron pipe on the water side. But again, as it gets older, it gets weaker. You start getting more cracks, failures, more roots, more things like that. Again, that's a hard question to answer, but it's pretty evident in the map. We haven't done that, and we're going to have to start doing it at some point in the near future, and that assessment will start filling in that. Again, it's not going to be a $45 million project like the wastewater plant, but it's going to be, potentially on a big street project. What's 6 blocks of clay tile roughly?
so, it's about $150 a foot.
$150 a foot. So again, it's not going to be huge projects, but it's going to be a lot of smaller projects as we do street projects to replace that clay tile. If you're going to put in a new concrete street that we want to get 50 years out of, we're probably going to have to start putting some clay tile under it, or not clay tile, replacing the clay tile with plastic, especially if we go in there and televise it and see some issues with it. The other thing we're seeing is, we're getting a lot of extra material in our sewer collection system right now. People tend to want to flush things that shouldn't be flushed. The grease and then the flushable wipes are not flushable. So we're running into a lot of issues with that, you know. If it doesn't come from your faucet or come from you, it really shouldn't go down the toilet other than toilet paper. So I can't stress that enough, especially with the amount of roots and things we're seeing. You know, we're out there trying to clean our lines about once every 3 years, but it's hard to keep up with when people are putting things down the system that are hanging up and causing issues. So, and a lot of those things also cause issues at the treatment facility. So not a great answer to your question, but yeah, it's just going to be something we're going to have to attack. Maybe not, you know, it's probably going to start and just keep building up as we go. But no, it's not all in 1 year. It'll just be spread out over the next 20, 25 years.
Kyle, in regards to the clay tile pipe, knowing that might be coming in the future, I know there's some different processes where they can actually make a pipe, replace a pipe within a pipe, where they use compressed air and blow. Essentially, do we have to replace all of this clay tile, or can we do something like that with some of those pipes?
You know, there's a lot of, we'll look at both of them in terms of options. Right now, we're looking at 21st Street. You know, when we started looking, we're doing a new street there. When we started looking at the numbers and the amount that we'd have to have replaced and the depth, it almost makes more sense to do a fiberglass liner, a blow-in liner. You know, if you got the road tore up anyway and the sewer's, you know, 6 to 8 foot deep, then it makes sense to open cut it. If we do come in and replace it and the street's brand new, yeah, we're probably not going to tear up the street. We're going to do a fiberglass liner. It's a little bit more expensive than open cutting, but if you got a new street, then it's probably cost effective to do that, the liners. So, yep.
When we do these projects, these road projects where we replace the water line, the clay lines, do you discuss with the homeowners adjacent as potentially timing for them to replace their clay lines? Because I run into a lot of clay lines in my real estate work, and they're fine sometimes. There are a lot of roots in others, and it's expensive for the homeowner, but if the road's already torn up, it might mitigate some of that expense.
Yeah,
Is
and
that
we're
an
having
education piece that you talk about?
Yeah, we're going to have a discussion with that with a couple of the homeowners on 21st Street, because they have some issues where their service line ties into our main, and we'll approach them because we televised it. We'll approach them and say, you know, hey, this would be the time for you to, if you don't, you're going to have issues in the future. This would be the time to do it. Same with lead service lines on the water. You know, if we know there's lead service lines, we try to approach them and let them know that, you know, while the street's tore up and things are tore up, and you have a contractor already mobilized, would be a good time to do it. So we try to do our best to do what we can with that.
All right, in essence of ending on time, because I know we have a busy night, and allowing folks to take a quick break if needed. Amy, just quickly for the public, because obviously during a work session, we do not take public input. It is a chance for the commission to have discussion. When can the public comment if that's something they choose to do? What is our timeline for this?
Sure, so we'll have the first reading on the ordinance will be next meeting, which is the 13th of June. And then the second reading and public hearing, along with the rate resolution, I have to look at my calendar here, will be that second meeting in June, which is June 27. But public comment, you know, if somebody can't come to the meeting or can't wait or would like more understanding, more explanation, we'll be putting some things on social media as well as our website. Kyle and Al and I are available to answer questions and walk folks through this exact presentation. Also, this is on YouTube. We've been streaming it for folks, and you know, people can come back and watch the presentation as well for more understanding. So just let us know what questions they have. We'll be happy to talk through them with them.
Wonderful, thank you. It's always hard at work sessions. It's not that we don't want to hear from the public. That's not what a work session is for. But it is to educate the public to know what's coming so they have a chance to process that information and then be able to come back and talk to the commission. All of us are always available. So if you want to reach out to any of us individually, or as Amy said, contact the city, we will make sure that those thoughts are shared as we prepare to move forward with this. There's no other business in front of the city commission tonight on the work session, so I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have multiple motions and multiple seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Anybody abstaining? All right, work session is concluded. We have about 3 minutes before we'll start the city commission meeting.